Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. I'm Robert Phoenix, broadcasting to you live from Austin, Texas, under another gunmetal gray sky. Appropriate, I think, for today, because we are celebrating Memorial Day. We're memorializing the people who lost their lives protecting our sanctity and our freedom and our way of life. It is a day that is generally considered to be sacrosanct. We don't question it. We don't... adjustment there. We don't question it. We don't put it under a microscope, because to do so would be un-American. And God forbid we fall into the trap of being un-American. You know, I was at Old Navy about a week ago. I was buying my son some pants for his guitar concert, and I was struck by the amount of attire that was American, like American-based. Stars and stripes on the swimsuits, the shirts, towels, panties. I don't know about the panties, but I didn't go to that part of the store. But I could see that maybe panties would be in that mix. Anyway, it was all America, all American, and you didn't see that during the Obama administration. There was no push for American attire. And remember, what's the image that we are sort of struck with, and remember Seth Rich by? It's him lounging in his all-American attire, drinking an all-American beer. Now, is it a coincidence that that's what he's wearing, that this is what we recognize him as, a real American, and that there's this flush of American attire or American-inspired attire out there in the world? It could be a coincidence, but seldom things are. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about Memorial Day today for the next 27 minutes. And we're also going to get into some passings here. The first passing of note is the passing and the death of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski. And when I first started my website, he was one of the first people that I looked at astrologically, because at that time he was advising Obama from a military strategic perspective. And he wrote the book called The Grand Chessboard, which is his theory of world dominance and world strategy and political and military strategy, especially as it relates to Russia, because he hated Russia. If there was anybody that hated Russia more than Zbigniew Brzezinski, I don't know who that person might be. He turned it into a lifetime battle. He's gone, and this guy has been one of the main controllers, one of the main puppet masters from behind the scenes, from a military strategic standpoint. If you look at everything that has taken place since 9/11. There are three main objectives that have occurred strategically in the Middle East and North Africa post 9/11. One was to gain access to the Iraqi oil fields. A lot of people, it just goes right under the radar. Iraq, a major oil producer, and we grabbed a hold of the oil. It's all in southern Iraq, and it's all under military control to this day. And there's a sweetheart deal with our good friends in the Middle East who manage that resource for us. So that was one of the main pieces, was to grab hold of the Iraqi oil. Another objective of the Iraq War was to go into Baghdad and plunder Baghdad. Because remember, Baghdad is the modern day site of Babylon. So there's all kinds of very interesting pieces of art and esoterica hidden and stashed away in Baghdad. So that was another prime directive, was to go in and grab as much esoteric and occult technology as possible. Another reason why we went to war with Iraq and expanded that war into other areas of the Middle East was to help promote the concept of Greater Israel, so that Israel could extend its borders and move into places like Iraq or Syria or Lebanon, wherever they wanted to expand the territory of Greater Israel. That was part of the plan as well. But another part of the plan for 9/11 was to use the ongoing incursions into the Middle East as a way to begin to fortify defenses against the Russians in that part of the world, specifically with Afghanistan, because Afghanistan butts right up against Russia on the southern side of Russia. So we have this kind of wall that's being built in alignment with these ongoing conflicts. So at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is essentially wall off the Russians and wall off their access to Gulf oil and also any of the waterways, especially coming out of Syria. It's a big part of it, and that's embedded in the grand chessboard, which is Brzezinski's work. So we can see sort of, kind of the umbrella effect there. And then, of course, in Afghanistan, there's the opium and poppy trade, which is essential for all the black budgets. Very, very important. So he's gone now. Now his daughter is still around, and she's on that show Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough, Cup of Joe, whatever they are, whatever they call it. And she's getting married to Joe Scarborough, who is an odd guy. He had an incident back when he was, I believe, a congressman, and he had a dead intern in his office. How often does that happen? Dead intern in your office, and maybe it happens a lot more than we think or know in places like Washington, D.C. Anyway, this is a little blip in his background, a little blip in his political history. So he is going to be marrying Mika Brzezinski, who's his sidekick on Morning Joe. And I don't really watch that show, but at the times that I have, she's useless. It's 9/11, by the way. She's useless. She's like, eye candy, really. Anyway, they're getting married, and maybe they'll have a little Zbigniew running around at some point. My nickname for Zbigniew Brzezinski, it's a very hard name to write, by the way, or type. You got Z-Biggie. That was my nickname for him, Z-Biggie. Adios, sayonara, au revoir, Z-Biggie. Okay, so since March 29th, right? March 21st. March 21st. David Rockefeller dies. Now we have Z-Biggie. He's gone. Isn't the sound of children just lovely? And then, there's really one person left at the top of that hit parade that everybody keeps asking, how long is this guy going to stay alive? How long is this guy going to stay alive? How old is he? That's Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger. And, You always got to gauge your audience, right? How does he stay alive? How does this guy keep going? You say, well, maybe it's that little embryo cocktail he has every morning. Maybe that keeps him chipper and on a pace to break the 100 mark and then some. But you may not get a really good response from the person that you're talking about. Huh? What? Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Go back down into your rabbit hutch. It's fine. So we got Kissinger. He's the big one that's left, and then you've got the Queen, and there's other people that you may not really be aware of behind the scenes. Of course, we have Evelyn de Rothschild and that whole Rothschild scene, but there's other people. Soros is probably in the mix too, but he's not leaving anytime soon, unless they write him out of the script. Now, speaking of being written out of the script, Greg Allman is gone, and I believe this is a very legit passing. Greg was canceled parts of his tour early in the year, right after the holidays, and he died at the age of 69, which is the same age as David Bowie. So we have the symbol of cancer with 69, so that's come up again. And of course, the United States is a Cancerian country, so perhaps this is part of the synchromistic revelation of what's happening to the United States. And the United States is in a death spiral. That's my feeling about it. And it's hard to witness, but at the same time, it's also, I think, an important part of the deconstruction of what we would consider reality to a large extent, and certainly the political reality, because people are understanding what a complete sham it is, total sham. And it's, I think, an integral part of, because, look, I do believe that there are people in this world and on this planet and on this continent. Again, I'm specifically talking about the United States of America because it's where I live, it's where I have a kid, and there's a significant amount of investment in this place. That there are a number of people that are waking up at an incredibly rapid rate. Really, 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 really rapid rate. And there is what I would call a moral center that's still intact. And it's kind of like the relationship to truth and food. And that we crave, really, at a core level, we crave really good food. And I'm not talking about, really high-end foodie food. No, I'm talking about really solid, nutritious, organic, local, well-prepared, lovingly kind of gathered food. When we have that experience, that's a really powerful experience. It nurtures us. It nourishes us. And we feel better because of it. And there's also a similar relationship to truth. So we also crave that same kind of spiritual nutrition in our lives. And when we get it, it feels like we're being nurtured, which is why we have all these people scrambling all over the internet, trying to understand what happened to Seth Rich, trying to understand what happened with Manchester, because they're trying to find the truth. They're trying to get to those ingredients that nurture them, because the world itself is built on pillars of illusion. So if we have that, and then we have what I would call the moral kernel, which is associated with truth, I do believe that there is an investment in something more organic, more long-term, more connected to a foundational relationship with our lives, our children, our families. I think this is an inherent part of who we are. And even though the symbolic splitting of the atom is occurring every single day, when it comes to this stuff, unless we are defeated, unless we are demoralized, we come back around again and say, this is it. This is where the the fight is, so to speak. And the fight or the battle has to do with the things that we, in many ways, have taken for granted for centuries and centuries and centuries. And now we see them evaporating, slipping away, and the evolution of that is quite demoralizing and daunting. At least to me it is. I mean, I don't really want to be living in a technocratic society where the elites have their life extension technologies and their virtual reality uploads of their consciousness and their biosynthetic implants and the eradication of the family and the biological act of creating a child. I don't want to live in that world. Some people might think it's really cool. Oh, isn't it cool? There's always a new thing that's cool. Hey, isn't that cool? But I don't think so. It's coming. It's coming, and it will be hyped as it always is and has been as an improvement in our lives. Faster, easier, better, more powerful, smarter, sexier, whatever it is. That'll be how it's marketed. So Greg Allman, great musician, fantastic, big Allman Brothers fan. Live at Fillmore East is probably one of the best live records of all time. The live version of Whipping Post, remarkable. I guess this is the end of the Allman Brothers, unless his son, Elijah Blue, wants to take over. I have no idea if he's got any musical background. The son of Cher and Greg Allman, Elijah Blue. So, Memorial Day. Here we are, and we memorialize our wars and our veterans and all the people that laid their lives on the line for you and I. But how have they really done that? Is really that what all the wars have been about? Stamping out the evil scourge, whether it was the first wave of Germanic nationalism or the second wave of Germanic nationalism. Was that what it was all about? Now, clearly the answer is no. But we have to ask the question from a rhetorical standpoint. No, that's not what it was about. It was about many, many, many things. Just like as we've seen what's happening in the Middle East post 9/11, there's at least half a dozen major agendas and plans going on there. And I did not even include the flush of refugee excess into Europe and into the United States. And that was planned too, by the way. That was totally planned. So the wars themselves had very specific purposes. If you look at World War I was a pivotal time in the history of Europe. And World War I was basically started with a gunshot. Very strange. Crown Prince Ferdinand killed in a motorcade, and kind of an amazing story. And this is how it all starts. It starts with revolution. All wars start with a revolutionary thrust and then get turned into something much darker, even though at times revolution can be pretty dark in and of itself. So what was happening in Europe during that time was you had the ruling class families. You had the Habsburgs and the Warburgs, and of course you had the Windsors, and all these kind of elite families. And they had been running Europe for centuries. And they would trade, like the Habsburgs would go into places like Spain, even though that wasn't really their country of origin. They're Austrian, Austro-Hungarian. And so they would go into Spain and they'd run Spain for a while. It was like their franchise for a while. So you had these ruling families essentially, running Europe. And World War I was about the like if you, there were ruling families that would get through World War One. Obviously, the House of Windsor was one of them, and they still rule, by the way, behind the scenes, most of Europe, if not all of Europe. But we had these other ruling families that got kind of knocked out. We got knocked out of the way and taken out of the game. And this is what happened with World War One. And then you have the rise of the nation state. So Europe gets completely redistricted. There are new countries that come out of this, and so this is where there's this major shift from these ruling families who get wiped out and this consecration of power. And then after that, with World War II, there's yet another kind of level of this. And after World War II, what we have is we have the infusion of socialism. This is what happens. And it starts off, of course, in 1917 with the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and it spreads all throughout Europe. Territories are taken, and the model of communism and socialism is adopted, even though these countries were not, countries like, I've got my dude here today, even though these countries were not satellites of the former Soviet Union, ideologically and politically, certainly they were. So World War II was all about the infusion of a new social model in Europe once the nation states have been carved up and created. And of course, destroying Germany a couple of times over, that was a big deal. That was a big part of it. Destroyed their infrastructure because they were quite powerful, in terms of manufacturing and ideas and all that. And of course, we have in 1948 the repatriation of the Zionists into Israel, which is another big part of this whole story. But it's rarely about defending ourselves against evil, right? I mean, how evil was the Korean War? How evil were the Vietnamese? Now, it could be said that we were marching against communism. We were stopping communism in its tracks. Well, we can't allow communism to gain hold, somewhere in the Far East, in a remote country like Vietnam. Got to stop it here. Well, stopping communism would have been a lot easier if we just cut off the wheat supply to Russia. Couldn't feed itself. This is true. We were supplying Russia with huge amounts of wheat. Now, of course, the American farmers liked that because they made money off of that. So they weren't going to say anything. But if you really wanted to defeat Russia, you just cut off their food supply. It would have been done. You wouldn't have to fight all these silly wars. No, the wars were fought for reasons. Always. Look at what happened with Japan in World War II. The United States bombed the shit out of Japan. Well, what do you do after you bomb the shit out of a country? You have to rebuild that country. You got to build it back up. It takes money. It takes resources. And who benefits from that? It's the industrialists who benefit from that. And when we went into Japan and we blew up Japan, we came back in with the Marshall Plan and rebuilt it. Who was there? It was people like the Rockefellers who were ready to start manufacturing from Japan, much cheaper than the United States. And this is when we have our first wave of outsourcing. We have this brief period of time where we being the United States, become the world's largest manufacturer of goods because Europe had been wiped out. They're trying to rebuild from a brutal war, and these new socialist systems are being implemented, which don't always, in fact, rarely, do they support growth, expansion, manufacturing, industry. It doesn't support it. The model doesn't support it. Because that growth, manufacturing, industry, expansion, for better or worse, that is connected to capitalism. That's how it works. So the United States takes on this role, albeit it lasts maybe a little over a decade. So 1949, 1950, the rebuilding of Japan commences through the Marshall Plan, and Japan gets turned into an industrial giant thanks to the United States and the industrialists of the United States. And now we get all of our toys from Japan, all of our cars from Japan. There was this big thing back in the 1970s, made in Japan, everything's made in Japan. And the funny thing was is that there was like, oh, it's cheap, it's made in Japan. Well, the Japanese were pretty good at making things. Better in a lot of ways than the Chinese. I digress a little bit. But we were essentially implementing our own obsolescence when we fought World War II through the reconstruction of Japan. And people made a lot of money, huge amounts of money. So we can see that wars are fought for reasons that are never about freedom, never about defending our right to live our life the way that we want to live our life. Because even the way that we live our life, that's even under question now. What are we defending? Now the new war, of course, is the war on terror. And it's the most insidious war of all. It is the war that will only end when the powers that be get what they want, which is a global government, which is a 24/7 security surveillance state. And when they get that, guess what? Terrorism will end. That's it. It'll be over. It'll be done. And they'll credit it. They'll have like these nominal roundups or fake fake flashpoints, but they'll credit it to all the security and all the surveillance, and that now the terrorists are afraid to move. They can't do anything without being tracked, and as a result, we're checkmating them at every possible moment. And it'll be a big deal. It's been 134 days since there's been a terror attack. It's been 250 days since there's been a terror. And they'll get to a year, and then you'll see the magazine covers. Is the war on terror over? And that's when you know that we'll be in another system at that point in time. It's only over when they say it's over. Bottom line. The challenge is that we've created kind of this variable, this X factor, which I've talked about before. If you go back and listen to the speeches of Louis Farrakhan, he says that there was no way that in 2003 there could have been a caliphate. No way. Because you had these various sects of Islam, and many of which were mutually exclusive from one another. Like the Shias and the Sunnis were just not going to sit down at the same table. It just wasn't going to happen. That's not the case now. I mean, I think there is more of a radicalism that is set in, and I'm not one of these people that's an Islamophobe, although I think it's a problem now because of what's happened over the last 15 years. Bombing and killing and maiming. And, at some point, that stuff is just going to create a class of severely wounded, psychologically damaged, and very angry people. And this is what we've been doing for the last 15 years in the Middle East, in North Africa. And under Trump, it doesn't look like it's going to abate. Unfortunately, he has abandoned not every single, but he's abandoned most of his campaign promises. And he was certainly trying to come off as a non-interventionist presidential candidate. And he didn't have much of a track record except what he spoke about and tweeted about. And most of it was very consistent, although there are a few inconsistencies, not as many as today. Most of it was pretty consistent. And now, boy, I mean, immediately, right out of the gate, $110 billion going to Saudi Arabia. $110 billion. It'll be what, 300 and we'll probably settle on 330 billion or 300 and, yeah, that would be a good number, wouldn't it? 330 billion. They're into those numbers. And Trump equates this with being like a savior in some ways. Like, oh, look at the jobs. Look at the jobs we're going to have. Look at all the income that this is going to create, and because that money's not going to the United States. That money is going to obviously private contractors. Why? Right? That's what it's going to. My familiar here is very friendly this morning. Yes, I know. Does Joe Rogan have a cat in his studio? I don't think so. Anyway, it would be one thing, right? I mean, let's say we had a nationalized relationship with our military-industrial complex partners. And we did a deal for $350 billion. Well, geez, maybe $175 billion of that would come back into the United States, like right back into the Treasury. But it doesn't. It doesn't. So the question around all of this is, why is there so much? I mean, we know that there is huge profit in war, okay? We know that. But then why is there so much investment in this from the Trump administration? It's like Jared Kushner is making deals. Why? Why? It's not about the jobs. It's a bunch of bullshit. Why? Is it because they're playing a part? The grand play of revelation before our very eyes? Is that what they're doing? And they know it? Or are they making a lot of money on the side as a result of it? That's quite possible too. Speaking of Jared Kushner, he's getting some heat now. He and the family are looking like slumlords with their series of properties in Maryland. You can look that up on the internet. If you haven't found it, it's definitely worth viewing or reading. Not a good look. Does it surprise me? No, of course not. Nope, not in the least. This is what hardcore, conscienceless capitalists do. And it's not a good look. Now, he's also got this back channel that he was trying to create with Russia. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Jared Kushner. Remember, he comes from a lot of power, a lot of money, and a lot of influence. And it might be one of these flashpoints where the neoliberals and the neocons actually go to battle with one another, because the neocons will support Jared Kushner at every step of the way. The neoliberals should too, because he and Ivanka are totally liberal to the core. So they may want to keep him around. He's helping their agenda. But it'll be fascinating to see what happens, and if he gets smoked out, and what the fallout is. Trump did not have a great tour. Let's be clear about that. There were some very, very uncomfortable moments, particularly between him and Melania, who swatted his hand away. I like Melania. I like her. I don't care if she might be a guy. I still like her. She's got her own vibe, right? She's got her own energy. She has her own presence. Of course, Barron Trump not there on the trip. And if I were Melania, I would have a real issue with Ivanka. And astrologically, they should, because they're opposite signs. Melania is like the Taurus. She's like the super Taurus, right? 5 planets or 4 planets in Taurus, and they're all in the second house. So she's about the most Taurus person I've ever seen in my foray into astrology. And then Ivanka's a Scorpio, so we have Taurus Scorpio in the opposition. And when we get into the opposition, we get into rivalry with same sex. Opposite sex, not so much. In fact, opposite sex is usually really good. You get 2 people who are opposite signs, and there's great potential there. But in the same sex, it becomes rivalry territory. So I'm actually going to do a piece on that, the rivalry between Melania and Ivanka. What do we have here? Getting some updates from people that they do in the live show. Well, I think that's about it. As you move through this day and try to understand the nature of war, and we do this every year. It's not the first time I've done a show like this, but it's important to bring it back into our consciousness. War is a racket, and not only is it a racket, but it is also oftentimes an exercise in the application of occult powers. And we can see this quite a bit in, just about every war theater that we wanted to, if we wanted to zoom in on and deconstruct. And it's even more than that. It's become embedded into our culture, our lifestyle, our entertainment, and it is something that this planet has been known for many, 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 many years. And at some point it'll change, but it'll change when they say it's changed on their version of reality, or in their version of the timeline. Tomorrow, when we come back here, 24 hours from today, we'll look at what our options are and how we might be able to influence this timeline with our conscious intention and stop things right in their tracks, or revert us and flip us back to another timeline experience, which is very, very possible. All right, this is Robert Phoenix, and you've been listening to 15 Minutes of Flame. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. I will see you guys 24 hours from today. Have a great Memorial Day. Ciao.